Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to the Bricks King podcast, where I'm going to bend your ear about Lego, review those amazing bricks and plastic, and discuss what is new and up and coming around the Lego world. I'm your minifig host, Matt. Let's build on it. Welcome in, everybody. How are we doing today? Hopefully everybody is doing quite well, no matter where you are around the world, or maybe you're on planet Mars or somewhere else, an alternate universe. Either way, I am glad you are here tuning in today. As you can tell by the title of this episode, we do have another interview, this time with Brenden and Greg from Lego Masters Season 3 here in the United States. And they're going to tell you a little bit about their experience. The only difference today is I was not privy enough to be able to take part in this interview, this question asking opportunity, just because of my weird schedule with teaching kids. I did not have that opportunity. So unfortunately, you don't get to hear my lovely voice during the interview, but you do now, which is always a plus for me. Just for me, right? Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Brenden and Greg.
Good to see you again. And what a great run. Saw the episode last night and my heart was breaking for you. I was so sad to see you eliminated on that episode. But my first question is really the kind of all of the episodes or all of your builds. We see on TV, we obviously know a lot of work goes into them, and there's a lot of great builds, and we see the builds that are on screen for like 10 to 15 seconds. We don't get to see a lot of them. Are there what type of details are in your builds, and you can choose any of them from over the season, that are your particular favorites that you wish had been made it on TV or you'd like us to know about?
Well, I'll just kind of start from the beginning. The first one that comes to mind is our spaceship. There was a cargo container in the back. You can see a hint of that because it's kind of yellow. It's a different color scheme. And inside of that, there was a bunch of medical supplies because the judges had encouraged us to show more personality. And I'm not sure we quite realized what they meant by that. So we were showing kind of different sides of our personality. And we're like, well, hey, we're not only competitive and aggressive, we also like, community service and a little bit of humanitarian work. But I don't think they ever showed that a little bit on screen. Let me think. Episode 2, that one was pretty self-evident. We didn't really have anything hidden inside the dinosaur except the frame. That was really a 360-degree viewable model. With the bull rider, it probably would have been more the structure and the design of that core pivot point. I don't feel like they showed much of the progress, but there was a lot of careful technical work that went into tying that down to the base that they provided, making sure that everything was structurally integrated. And then how I constructed the pivot point itself was kind of like what they call a U-joint. They use it in drive shafts for vehicles and things like that. And it allowed it to pivot in every direction, even though it was made out of like it wasn't an actual ball and socket, right? It was made out of individual pivot points. So that was an interesting mechanical bit that would have been fun to show off. Number 4, tree houses. That was there's a lot of symbolism in there, but we talked about most of it, I think, and how it related to our family and our individual siblings. With episode 5, the dog build, we may have mentioned it, but there's actually wheels inside the paws. And I spent a while kind of engineering those paws because I wanted them to look anatomically correct and sculpted and a little bit hairy because, it's a dog paw, but have that wheel in there, low profile enough that it could roll down the carpet. And then I spent some more time getting those connected to the ankles so that they wouldn't, break or something like that under the weight of the dog. So that was a little bit of kind of simultaneously sculpting and engineering work at the same time that I was kind of proud of. Stop me if you have questions, but number 6, pilot ship. I think we kind of talked about that too. The way we constructed it was just kind of a bunch of panels that were connected together. So it allows us to build it up very quickly. Inside was a pretty simple frame. It was just bricks and plates and just attaching where necessary to hold those panels together. And then of course we have episode 7 with the camps, and we built that little whale flight simulator. It was just kind a fun, whimsical idea. And I spent most of the challenge working on that. Movement was required, so we really wanted to lean into the movement. And that was, I like to think, a bit of a mechanical feat. I definitely spent some time kind of figuring out how I was going to make something go up and down and around in a circle simultaneously. So I could go into details, but that could get super geeky really fast. So I'll let you guys decide if you want to hear more about that.
Okay, yeah, I might ask or have some of the others ask, or I'm sure they'll have additional questions. My second question for you is, obviously, it's a really different environment building there on set. You've got the lights, the cameras, you've got all those other people. What was the biggest challenge for the two of you building on set versus at home?
It's a good question. It's hard to say. It was so different. I find it hard to compare, especially for me. I've done more actual digital mocking than I have in-person building. I don't really have much of a collection. I'm not a typical AFOL in that way. Pardon my dog in the background. Hopefully he doesn't squeak his toys too loudly.
Mine often makes cameo appearances as well, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, so I'm used to digital building, but I'm very conceptual. I don't necessarily struggle to translate that to real life. Of course, the time constraint is a big one. Most people probably talk about that, but I come from a work environment where I have to estimate tasks and manage my time. So that was not completely out of place. I think the biggest challenge was just building something to order, right? Building something that somebody else asked for, and it's not entirely clear what what they're wanting out of it necessarily. And that can be hard to understand sometimes. Sometimes you can get off on the wrong foot and the judges come around and tell you like, oh, that's what you wanted. And you're kind of stuck in that groove already. So that, now that I think of it, that was probably the most difficult part, was having to build something with some specifications. But then again, it's very subjective, it's open to interpretation, and it's hard to know if you're delivering.
Yeah, I can imagine that that's definitely a challenge if you've been doing a lot of mocks. So my last question is, do you have any particular interactions with Amy, Jamie, or Will that we didn't get to see on camera that's just like a favorite memory?
Not a lot. The cameras were always around when you're interacting with the hosts and the judges. There was pretty much every challenge the judges would have an initial check-in. Sometimes they would have a follow-up, usually get a pretty complete set of feedback during the judging. And they'll say some nice things, they'll say some criticisms, which can kind of make it hard to tell how it's going to go. But there were a few things I was proud of. I don't know if they emphasized it much in the final episode, but for the bull rider, I think they really liked the movement that we put into it. Even though it was a very risky move, we knew we were compromising strength. I knew it was at risk of snapping, which it did end up doing. But I think Jamie appreciated the technical feat, and I think Amy even appreciated how it kind of brought that character to life, even though she doesn't really focus much on technical skill. And then similarly for our whale camp that we called it the flight simulator in the center there, Jamie made a comment like Brendan's trying to do in 11 hours. He's like, what we would probably spend a week on in our design shop. He said we'd probably spend a week on that to get it, all the kinks worked out of it and up to par. So the fact that it was, I want to say, almost flawlessly functional, I was pretty proud of. And he even made a comment early on. He said something like, if you can pull that off, I'll be impressed. So I don't know if he said quite the same words at the end, but I'll take it as Jamie was impressed. And then same episode, coincidentally, Will came over to me and Greg at one point, and he was doing his little bit. Then he kind of leans in. He's like, okay, seriously, guys, like for real, this is not scripted. And he just kind of asked, like, kind of what's making us tick, and like, why are you guys here? You're not necessarily like the other teams. You're not necessarily typical Lego fans. And it took me a second to snap out of it, because I know Will kind of likes to break the fourth wall, and so I'm like, is this part of the show? Is he actually being for real? I think he was, because they completely cut it from the final episode, but that was kind of fun. Like, I think he was genuinely curious at a personal level to get to know us a little bit better. So that was memorable. And similarly at the end, when we went home, He probably shook all the team's hands as they walked off set. I'm not sure, but he made a point of coming around and saying, hey, sincerely, guys, off camera, great job. Don't let this get you down. And then I guess the final note would be also after we went, we got a little moment with the judges, and that was generous of the producer, because during the competition, they're limited on how much they can interact for fairness reasons. But we said, hey, now that we've gotten cut, like, can we just have a moment face to face, off camera, non-scripted? We just kind of got to hear a little bit of their honest personal feedback, and that was also nice. All right, give me a second, because if it's not bothering you, it's bothering me, the way this dog is squeaking. We'll save that toy for later. He's got others he can play with.
But I'm sure it's his favorite one. Mine has come and wandered in and left since you've been talking. So those were all of my questions. I'm going to see make sure that everybody else has a chance to ask questions. But it was a pleasure watching you build during the season, and I hope to run into you at some time at a LegoCon.
Okay, thank you, Megan.
Hey, Brenden, so great to be talking to you again. Obviously, wish it was under different circumstances, but still always excited for the opportunity. One thing I wanted just to comment on is you had an amazing run. You were able to win 4 challenges, which the only other team to do that, if you count the final finale, was Nick and Stacy. So you really had such an unbelievable run. So I'm curious, from all of either your wins or the challenges that you got to participate in, what was your favorite, or what was the standout and your takeaways from it?
Yeah, so I think our favorite overall would have been the dog challenge, the first one that we won. That was really up our alley. Like I said, we struggled sometimes with the subjectivity and what the judges wanted. That was very clear cut. It was pretty objective, replicate it. And I think for both of us, that's kind of our sweet spot. Greg has done animal sculpting. Unfortunately, they weren't able to show some of his best work because it was done under contract. But he's done models of that caliber and better. I haven't done animal sculpting, but my build style is very much replicating things in real life. And so we were both kind of in our comfort zone there, and we rocked and rolled. And then personally, I think probably one of my favorite things that I did that I kind of take more personal credit for was that mechanism during the summer camp challenge, because I went all in on that. And I was pretty proud of how it turned out.
Well, it was very cool to see on the show for sure. Obviously in your final challenge, we saw you and Greg struggle a bit, especially coming up with an idea and then having less time to execute that idea. Talk us through just like kind of looking back on it. What was it like to go through that challenge and some of the struggles that you encountered?
Oh man, I have looked back on that a lot. I thought through every detail. And I had to say, in summary, I feel like it must have been meant to be, because there were so many things out of place that just was not like us. I was like, how did that happen? Like throughout the season, we were consistent. We came up with a plan. We scheduled our time. We broke it down and we executed. And I like to think by and large, we executed well. And this time, regardless of the writer's block that we got at the beginning, we just didn't execute. We didn't plan it as well. We just didn't manage to follow through. I was definitely off base when it came to the mechanical things. There's so many things I've looked back. I'm like, I easily could have done that a different way that would have been more effective. And not even something like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. It should have been obvious to me at the time. So something was off. And honestly, we even went into that challenge feeling pretty good. The previous episode had ended early, so we were well rested. We had a later call time. We came in energized. Like, I can't say that, it started off or was purely due to, because I think we were feeling a little too good, ambitious with some of our initial ideas. We kind of had to dial it back, and then we were feeling a little bit bummed about that. But then, because of the first time that red rock, once we actually started, we were off our game, and so we didn't scope out the dimensions and the breakdown of the work like we normally do. We just kind of jumped in, and it's hard to say what all the factors were. I'm sure there was a little bit of stress and anxiety, at least for my part, going into that. And man, it didn't come together.
Yeah, Greg, anything to add just in terms of your experience going through kind of some of the struggles of that, final episode?
And I do want to pop in real quick that Greg is now here. So I'm going, in case you didn't see him pop in, but we now have both of them.
I apologize about that. I was on a business call and lost track of the time. So that is 100% on me, because
no worries.
Joy did her part. So
we're glad to have you here for at least some of it.
Thank you. Yeah, Michael, that's a good question. So I think one of the biggest things that sort of ended up burning us in episode 12 was once we finally did have a concept, we had a solid concept in terms of what we wanted to execute. I think there was a little bit of miscommunication between us in terms of some of the scale things, as Brenden mentioned. That was difficult for us because most of the time we were building within about 30 minutes of the clock starting. And in this case, it was over an hour. I think it's about an hour 10 once we finally landed on that concept and started putting brick down. So that was a big part of it. Some of the concepts we had landed on were great, but they were ambitious. And then once we landed on our final concept, I spent about half of that episode just dealing with the pump and the hoses. They were very difficult to use. The control of the system was quite tricky, and then you're constantly just like you're splattering water everywhere. And so you're going to mop up after yourself and all your Legos soaking. And so there was that unpredictability element for us where I think because of how high we were trying to move a lot of the water and then having it come from like the top of the windmill back down, we introduced an additional layer of difficulty. And the pumps, as far as the control of the water flow would go, they actually only cut off to about half speed. You couldn't fully control the flow of water. So if you wanted to reduce, and they're quite powerful. So if you were going at like full bore, I mean, those things were spraying water out like a garden hose, right? So if you wanted to reduce the flow, you could turn it back to 50%, but then after that, you could only reduce it by either putting in like splitters to the hose or having the hose be longer. So I really spent a lot of time. I mean, I spent easily 4 hours of that episode, like trying to be a hydrologist, I guess, and like learn about water flow. And so like Steven had an advantage because they deal with hoses and water flow all the time. And then Nick and Stacy, maybe they were just a lot smarter in terms of trying to do something very simple with their water. And Dave and Emily kind of did the same thing. So we did something more ambitious, leave it to us to over-engineer a challenge, but at the same time, with an element that we just did not realize how wildly unpredictable and difficult the water was going to be to work with. So we just normally could we have executed that concept? No problem. It was how many hours I sunk into dealing with the water alone that really was what burned us in the end.
Well, you still put up a great showpiece, so nothing to worry too much about that. For my last question, I just, we got a great, moment from you at the end. Greg, you got very emotional and you led us into just really what this all meant to you to get to spend time with your brother in this way. And so, looking back at the experience, I just love your takeaways from this experience together and what you're leaving with.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry, Michael, I think I maybe didn't quite understand what was the question in there?
Sorry, just, like I said, we saw it was so important for you to get to spend this time with your brother, looking back on the experience, what are your takeaways and what are you taking away from all this?
Perfect. Okay. So I think there's a couple things and I voiced this on the show. So, like metal, let's say that you're trying to forge a sword, right? That is to make that sword into something which is useful, right? You have to put it under heat and you have to put it under stress and you have to put it under pressure and you're beating it with a hammer and it's going into heat and then it's going into water and it's getting cold. And what that's doing is it's forging the metal and it's tempering the blade. And then that means that it can take an edge and now it can be sort of used in a useful or meaningful way. And so I think that an experience like this does a lot of the same thing. It sort of helps forge you as a person, and your responsibility in terms of whether or not you grow is how you choose to respond to that pressure. And so is it the outcome that we wanted? Like, no, I mean, of course not. Like we went to win, we said that from the jump. And at least for me, Brenden kept I think Brenden maybe at first wasn't quite as ambitious, maybe overly ambitious in his goals, but I think, he got there too. I remember him saying somewhere maybe like halfway through the season, Brenden, where he was like, dude, I think we could win this thing. And I'm like, yeah, we can. So, we had that aspiration and I think that we had the ability, right? And so just to have a day where you do sort of trip, like the one time when you can't afford to, right? There's no other team who's maybe going to be in the bottom two under you. Like it's the one time you can't have a bad day. And it's like the one time we had a bad day, I feel like. And so, we turned out something that's just not what we wanted to turn out. But so that's a frustrating way to end. It's like getting disqualified at mile 25 of a marathon. You've already done we did more work than any other team that got cut, right? Because the last team you saw was at episode 10, and then we did 11, and then we did 12, and then we get cut at the very last stage before the finale. So that's a difficult thing to experience. I think overall that we responded pretty well to those stressors. But for me, the experience holistically, it was really cool to get to handle and approach Lego at such a high level, which you don't normally get to do. So you're taking something that's maybe generally a hobby for you, or, an outlet for stressors for certain people, but it's something that I've always liked to approach very seriously as kind of an art medium. And this is like the major leagues of competing with Lego, right? Like there's little competitions you do at a convention, but this is the major leagues. And so to get there and then to do pretty well throughout the season. I mean, we won 4 challenges if you include our team with Nick and Stacy. I think that's the most that a team's ever won on Lego Masters before, at least in 3 seasons of US, I think.
Yeah, I think Mark and Boone also got 4.
Okay. So up there with Mark and Boone, which is pretty great. But to get the time to spend with Brenden too is really cool, because we were quite close as younger kids together growing up on the farm we did in the Midwest. But, we live about 1,400 miles away, and we have for the last several years. So that was a cool opportunity. Lego has been something that we've always had. That's been a bonding agent for us. And so to get to go back to that thing and then compete together in the major leagues over this shared interest was a really cool opportunity. And to get that much time together, which we would just normally not get in the course of our daily lives.
And I just want to say for myself, I can't claim to be quite as passionate a person as Greg is, but I am definitely ambitious and competitive. I do try to hold my expectations a little lower. So going in, I don't know what we're up against. We really got to feel this thing out. We haven't been tested, but 2 or 3 challenges in, I was like, we're doing well. I really think we can do this. And so we wanted to win. I wasn't sure if we could. Then I was like, okay, now I know we're capable of it. So I think I was every bit as much, hoping for that. We definitely had our eyes on the prize, whether or not we thought it was possible. We gave it our all, and man, it was pretty crushing. We felt it coming because we knew we weren't doing well, but especially everything leading up to it. We went so far. We had a great idea for the finale. We knew we had the stuff, and at the end of the day, it is what it is.
Not gonna lie, after we walked out of the studio, we did shed a few hot tears in the parking lot. So
I'm not an emotional guy. I don't cry, but I cried.
Hey, ain't no shame in that. Congrats again on your amazing run on the show, and I hope I'll get a chance to talk to you both soon.
Let's do it.
Michael.
Well, before we move any further into this interview, we've got to take an ad break. We will be back in a moment. Don't go anywhere.
So great to speak with you guys. My first question is just to get a little bit of background on the two of you. I mean, it was alluded to a little bit in the show, but can you tell us a bit about how you got into the Lego hobby originally?
So for me, I played with Lego from the time that I was about 6, probably, that I remember when we were kids. And in that collection was actually a lot of my dad's Lego from when he was a kid. So, there's Lego in that tub that's probably 40 years old. And then my brother added some sets to it over time, so we'd play as siblings. I bought my first set, which was the Bulls Attack set, on eBay on dial-up internet when I was 12. And I started doing stop motion when I was 14, and I've just sort of never stopped. So that's actually been a big avenue through which the art medium has grown for me, is through doing stop motion animation.
Yeah. So for me, we're brothers. I obviously grew up in the same house, playing with the same family collection. I didn't invest quite as much as Greg did. I was more of a cheapskate and went for alternative building systems that were more affordable. But, I never lost that interest or love. For me, I tend to dream big, and I always felt limited by our meager kind of old style collection. And so that's part of actually why I shifted to more of a digital building medium, is I really like that unlimited factor of parts and colors. So that was a really cool aspect of building on the show, was although, the collection is curated a certain way, you don't have every kind of Lego part available. Those that they lean into, especially traditional bricks, do feel almost unlimited, and you really get to lean into that if you build in the right style. And that's pretty fun. I remember especially building the castle. We went for a pretty standard brick style. It was a fairly square, and we just went back for buckets and buckets of 2x8s and 2x4s, and they just kept coming. And that was a pretty cool experience.
Sounds like it. So what was your favorite build from this season?
Oh, Mikey, bar none. That's the Boston Terrier from episode 5.
Brenden, do you have a favorite?
Oh, sorry. I thought I'd answered that already. I was letting Greg answer, but I also really enjoyed the dog build. That was more of Greg's specialty, but I appreciated the model sculpting kind of objective side of things. For me, in terms of kind of what I did, would probably be the mechanical, what should we call it? The flight simulator, as we called it, from the whale camp in episode 7. That I felt pretty proud of.
It's worth noting in terms of that mechanism that he created. Jamie actually told us, and it didn't make the edit, but Jamie told us in the studio, he said, if we had tried to produce that at like an official Lego facility, he said, we probably would have worked on it for a week with a team of people, and from start to finish, Brenden produced that in 11 hours as a flawlessly functional model. So from an engineering standpoint, wicked impressive. And I know I'm a little biased because he's my brother, but it's probably the most advanced thing that's ever been engineered on the show.
Well, it was certainly a very impressive build. I'll give you that one. My last question is one that I've been asking all of the contestants because it's one that I get frequently on my blog, and it's from adults who are either just coming back to Lego in their later years or who are just actually starting Lego as a hobby. And the question is, what advice would you give to them as they're starting out and trying to develop their skills?
Well, I haven't really started as an adult, so it's hard to say. At least for me personally, speaking from more of an engineering perspective, I just like kind of gathering information, follow blogs, like the Brothers Brick, for example, find builders that you like or that you like their style. You can learn techniques, you can get inspiration. And personally, I just like to familiarize myself with the system. I look for new parts that are released. I like to think about how they interlock. I like to just kind of look around my world and think, hey, how would I build that out of Lego? How would I build that? Some kind of jump off the wall at you and they sort of fall into place. Others, you really have to think, how could I possibly build that with Lego? I like to keep it in my head, if you will, and just kind of always have that as a toolbox in a way. But everyone has a different style. Some like to plug in, be part of the community, attend conventions. So in that sense, I would say find your groove, right? Find the style that you like, find other builders who build in the same style where you can get inspiration, because Lego has something for everyone.
Thomas, my answer to that would be start by buying a variety of Lego sets. Get yourself some Technic, get yourself a Creator, get yourself a kind of a smattering of different themes or styles, because what that will do is it will teach you the brick system. And it is a system, right? And it's a wicked complicated one in its capability, but it's actually a very simple system in its sort of base interaction, right? You're taking something with studs and you're attaching it to something else that accepts studs. So at its core, it's not very hard to understand how to use. But the complexities of what can be achieved with it are just like, it almost boggles the imagination. But if somebody sort of had a smattering of sets from different themes, styles, etc., it would do a lot to teach a new Lego user about how the brick system interacts with itself, how the Technic system interacts. And what that'll do is it'll give you the sort of foundational tools to then begin to explore into areas of personal interest or design.
Great advice. Well, thank you very much for all of your time and congratulations on making it so far in the show.
Thank you.
Hey, Greg. Hey, Brenden. Good to see you
again. Hey, Naomi. Good to see you
again.
How's
it going?
Pretty good. Thank you.
So once again, everybody has mentioned that it was just so great to see you guys achieve so much in the show. And I was really cheering on for Team USA and really, really glad that you inspired so many people with the journey that you had. And I wanted to focus a little bit on one of the episodes, and that was the Start Your Engines episode.
Yeah.
And that was where you had the team dynamic, and then you had the pit change and how you were able to turn that around. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time about that. And so the question is, when we had a chance to talk to the Stevens on our show, they had mentioned that, Greg, you have this mind of just, you stripped the entire tire off completely, and that you had, I guess, this puzzle brain that you could just tell Stacey, okay, send me this part, et cetera. And that is what they thought helped get you faster through this process. And I'm curious about, when you worked as a team, did you decide that ahead of time, or did you say, I've got this, and you knew what you were going to do, kind of like the Mikey episode. It sounded like you had this already set. So can you talk us through that process a little bit?
Absolutely. So, once they won pole position, we kind of figured that it was over, right? Because it's very, as you saw from, the test run, it's very difficult to pass on that track. It's barely wide enough for two vehicles. So while driving, it's very tough to pass. So, and, we had a heavier driver. And so because we were capped at a certain percentage of power, especially for the first 5 laps, the fact that our car, because of the driver, Brendan's a much bigger guy than Emily is. We probably weighed 60, 70 more pounds. Brendan, what are you, probably 170? So so 70 more pounds minus a few pounds for the weight of their car because it was brick built, so heavier. That's a lot of weight in a small goat car without a ton of power. So then when they explained to us how the pit stop was going to work, I knew that the pit stop would be the only opportunity for us to actually have a shot at the race, because if we could potentially clear the pit first, no matter how we'd started, if Brenden could get out first, even though Emily would still have an advantage with the speed of the car, because of how difficult it was to pass, it'd be very tough for her to overtake him in the last 5 laps. So they gave us just a sort of a brief introduction to what we were going to do with the tires. And one of the rules was that no pieces could end up on the ground. Everything had to be on the cart before the pit stop ended. But I realized that the cart had 3 layers. So Nick and I are the faster builders in that scenario. So we said, okay, listen, we're going to take the tires and we're immediately going to move them down to the second tray so we don't mix up any of the pieces. And then I was like, Nick, we'll just strip all the pieces off the tire as fast as we can. Just get everything off. Then we'll bring them back to the top tray. And while we were stripping off the plates and pieces, Stacy was sorting them out for us by piece type. So when we came back to the top tray, all we had to do was just take the pre-sorted pieces and just plug them back in to the tire. And we had a little bit of a look at the tire beforehand, and each quarter of the tire was identical. So if you could memorize how to build 1 quarter of the tire, you knew how to build all 4 quarters of the tire. It was just rinse and repeat. And it wasn't super complicated to do from a building perspective. So Nick and I we kind of stuck it in our heads. And then once we got to the pit, second level, stripped the pieces, came back to the top. Stacy had sorted everything for us, and it was just plug and play. And so we really got to take advantage of all 3 people and reduce the complexity of the tire change from having all these pieces mixed together and then taking one piece off and trading it for another one. So of course, as you saw in the episode, it was very efficient.
And I guess, Brenden, were you part of that planning process too, or did you know about that while you were?
A little bit, yeah. We planned it as a team, and that was one of the things that Greg and I felt like we brought to the team was our planning ability. With the exception of episode 12, we generally planned and executed well. But in terms of doing it, I just kind of had to sit there and cheer my team on. So just like in a real race, a driver depends on his crew. It's a team effort.
Well, I heard from the other team in another interview that they had a 200-pound weight limit as well. So they only had Emily who could drive it based on the other team members. Okay, my second question has to do with the MCU challenge. And I asked this of the last team too. If you had a choice of doing a scene in the DC universe, what scene would you choose?
I'm not as familiar with the DC universe, but I might pick something from Aquaman. I think the underwater aspect of that could make for some pretty cool compositions. And then, I like his outfit, all the scales and kind of fishy look is unique.
The Aquaman idea is a great idea. That didn't jump to mind at first, but replicating, I actually think it would be really cool to do the scene from The Dark Knight Rises, the Christopher Nolan film, when Bane is fighting Batman in kind of like the sewer system underneath Gotham. That would be a pretty cool model to build.
That's awesome. And my last question would be, what do you do for inspiration when you're looking for new ideas? Some people, they think about music, and this would be at home. This isn't on the show. So, for example, you might think about music, you might be drawing, you might meditate, you might go to a certain location. We heard from a previous team that they liked, like Louise, for example. So where is the place or what do you do to get inspiration when you're building at home?
Well, I'll be honest, I'm not a super creative person. Being the engineer, that's probably not surprising. So my building style is almost strictly scale models. So I just look around and whatever I think is cool or looks cool, I would like to have a version of sitting on my desk. That's usually what I start. brainstorming about. So, one of the few mocks that I've built in person, and one of my favorites that I have currently is a locomotive. It's a diesel electric locomotive. It's a General Electric model with the BNSF livery on it. And it's a larger scale. It's probably about this big. And that's fun. Those would come by our house. We had a train track going right past our backyard, and they're in operation today. They pull a lot of freight trains. And so I thought, hey, those are cool engines. I want to build one. Similarly, I'm kind of brainstorming about the largest ever steam locomotive created. It was for the Union Pacific, and it's called the Big Boy. So it's just things that I think are cool. I'd like to create. I think about different ideas of buildings, other vehicles. I've done chess sets, like other kinds of games, just whatever is aesthetic.
I spend a lot of time in my brain. So things I cook up in my brain inspire me, but I guess you could say for external inspiration, as much as I wildly appreciate music, I actually don't listen to a lot of it. I really enjoy thinking and reading. So I do a lot of that, but organic forms inspire me. I love doing like landscaping, rock work, animals, no surprise there. So I think I enjoy the irony and the juxtaposition of taking something which is inorganic in its base form, a brick, right? And then trying to turn it into something that has an organic end result. And so like somebody who does that bit of a different approach to me, like Nathan Sawaya does that with a lot of his sculptures, but I prefer to take it in a bit of a different direction and even think about using different slopes or wedge pieces to try to replicate certain anatomical features down to like strains of muscular tissue when I'm doing a model. So, like a lifelike replica of a giraffe or a fox, something like that. I'm kind of thinking about doing a large model of a phoenix. And so those things are very intriguing to me because you have this kind of clash. Like Lego lends itself naturally to building things like buildings or castles. And I'm not taking away from the artists that do that. Like please do. People make amazing things. But I am more drawn to the things that it doesn't lend itself to very naturally. And I think that's when you really start to have to wrestle with the limitations and then find capability in the medium. And it has a lot of capability, but it's sort of that constant problem solving, taking in inorganic form and trying to render an organic form. That's what inspires me a lot to build things with Lego.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much. And those are great ideas for inspiration for anybody. And really glad to have gotten to know you through the show and for all the inspiration you give to so many builders in the community and for others who are going to be in the Lego community. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to wrap up this interview. Another Lego Masters Season 3 contestant pairing with Brenden and Greg. Hopefully you guys had an opportunity to learn some new things about them. I actually went back and listened as I was editing this multiple times because I was not able to be there and actually hear all the other questions. So hopefully you enjoyed it. And moving onward, we still have 2 others to get to. Those will be coming, so expect them soon, I would say. So until we meet again, I'm your Minifigure host, Matt. Let's build on it.